Lead Well, Live Whole, the podcast where leadership meets life. Your host, Michael Sirmon, is here to help you rise above the noise, lead with purpose, and live with clarity. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to Lead Well, Live Whole, where we go beyond the noise to talk about leadership that actually lasts. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon, and today's episode is going to hit close to home for a lot of us. It's titled Reputation or Reality, Leading Beyond the Image. Because let's be honest, today's world is obsessed with perception. Polished bios, curated profiles, carefully worded emails. But here's what I've learned. You can't build your legacy on likes, and you can't lead with power if your reality is hollow. So today, we're unpacking how to lead with authenticity, not just visibility. Our central theme really is about the danger of building a leadership persona without personal foundation. Because if your identity is wrapped in applause, you're going to lead for approval, not for impact. But why do we do that? Because we crave applause. We do. It's our nature. I mean, the humans, we want to be accepted. We want to be liked. We want to be admired. So when we get that little bit of applause, it starts from when we're a kid. We do that first thing, and then we get the claps and we get the laughter. So we do more of that, and then we eventually learn to go for that dopamine rush, right? That positive feedback, and it creates a dopamine loop, right? We get the likes, we get the applause, we get the praise, we get the promotion. Our brain then releases dopamine, which is that feel-good neurotransmitter. Every compliment, every public accolade, every social media becomes like a mini hit of this drug. And over time, the brain begins to associate approval with worth. And then we begin to crave that next hit, which just reinforces the pattern. And that pattern's simple. Perform leads to applause, which leads to dopamine, which then we repeat that, then we perform, then we get more applause, and we get a bigger rush of dopamine. But what happens when you don't get the applause? What happens when you don't get the likes? Because I do know this loop is incredibly addictive, and not just metaphorically, right? It's a neurological thing. There's a chemical reality. It's the same reward pathway that's triggered by drugs, by sugar, by gambling, by anything that triggers the adrenaline rush, right? It's a real addiction you have to deal with. And then your social validation then becomes your identity fuel. We began to shift away from I am to more they think I am. And it's going to be very subconscious, right? We start making the changes. We start altering who we are and losing ourselves somewhere in that whole shuffle. And we began to curate a persona instead of cultivating a true character. Because fear is not so much about being rejected as much as it is about being irrelevant, right? We want our voice to be heard. We want our voice to be respected. We want people to listen when we speak. We want people to call upon us, and we want people to acknowledge and realize that we are impacting the world, impacting their world. So we build our online profiles. We deliver carefully worded emails. We perform in meetings, all to maintain an image. And the whole while, we fear being exposed, not for what we did, but for who we aren't. Right? We talk all the time about, imposter syndrome, and everybody says, well, it's really not a thing because if you're an imposter, you wouldn't worry about it. But the reality is we are all imposters at some level and in some way, right? It's a rare individual that can be 100% authentic everywhere across the board, that never makes a comment to someone where you compliment them when they don't really deserve to be complimented, because you want their response, right? We're not, we're drawn to those people that will reinforce the ego that's there, right? So we walk around with that thought in the back of our head that says, what if they find out I'm not as confident, capable, or consistent as they think? that was kind of the central theme of a lot of the movies back in the 1980s, right? Where you got the jocks, and you got the popular kids that were picking on the nerds, and they were doing different things. And but when it all flips around in the end, and you start digging into that truth session where everybody reveals about being picked on and being insecure, and everybody in there has that same response. Everybody has that same reaction, because we're all human, and we all have the same triggers, and we all have the same motivation of community, motivation of being accepted, of being of being relevant. So we walk around, consciously or subconsciously, we have it in our head. What if they find out I'm not as confident, capable, or consistent as they think? That fear then begins to drive performance-based leadership, which may look strong from a distance, but when you get up close to it and you put it under pressure and under fire, it is incredibly brittle, because we've walked into what I like to call an identity trap. Because when our identity is outsourced to some kind of external approval, then we begin leading from insecurity, not integrity. I've had many conversations over the years with leaders about decisions, making a short-term decision based off fear that was a bad long-term decision, because it came back to the whole vision concept, right? The whole understanding of who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing and where I'm going. To I have a board, I have a manager, I have a leader, I have stockholders, I have somebody that expects this today. And that fear of not performing, that fear of not being who they expect you to be, which is the one who makes things happen, suddenly causes you to do something that is a horrible, horrible long-term decision, but it feels good in that moment. Because when we lead from insecurity and not our integrity, we avoid having those hard conversations. And we do that not because we're afraid of the conversation, but because we're afraid that they might damage how this other person sees us, right? Yeah. Working with families over the years, I've seen parents of teenagers, especially moms, right? The mom is the best friend with the daughter who's a teenager. Well, the mom can't mother the teenager because she's afraid if she says no, that she's no longer going to be the best friend of this teenager. Well, the reality is we all like fences. We all need to understand and know what winning looks like, what success looks like, what the expectations are, so that we have the opportunity to step up and be successful within that arena. I had a real good friend, a guy I worked for, a boss named Jerry Spires, and I loved Jerry's leadership style. But what I really liked about Jerry was he would make the comment that if you give me the parameters and show me the end zone, I'll figure out how to get there. And he would figure out how to get there within the parameters as they were laid out, right? He didn't have to go outside the lines. He didn't have to go outside and invent something new. He could, based off of his creativity and his drive, he could figure out a way to get a team down the field and across the finish line. Now, on the opposite end, I've had leaders, which I'm not going to call out their names, that we have stood nose to nose having a heated conversation because they were wanting to cut this facility, cut out these people, or cut out this service, or stop this or stop that, because at the moment it's not a profitable thing. But that moment was a dip or a recession. It wasn't the long term. And then these same leaders I've seen years later come back trying to rebuild what they walked away from. But the truth is, when you create that void, when you stop doing what has made you successful and you open up that void, somebody else is going to rush in there, and they're going to do and build their success off of what you built your success on. And you're not going to get back into that market. You're not going to take it back over because you've already told those customers, I can't be relied on to do what it is that you need me to do consistently in the downturns and in the upturns. Having said all that, I know there's times you have to make decisions based off of financial conditions at the moment, but they should be adjustments, not wholesale excisions. So when we lead from insecurity, We overcommit to prove that we're indispensable. We hide weaknesses instead of healing them. And we say yes way too much because we're afraid that saying no might make us look lazy or inadequate. Or even worse, they'll turn to somebody else who says yes, which makes us irrelevant. The ironic part is that our image addictions, they actually drain our authenticity. They drain that very trait. They water down, dilute that very thing that we need to build our true influence. Because if we're being real, we understand and we know that you can't be committed to applause and truth at the same time. Now, there are moments that they're going to coincide, but most of the time in life, the truth tellers, they don't get the applause because the truth tellers are like the adult in the room who understands and knows the consequences. Eventually, the pressure to maintain that public image is going to outweigh the peace of living with your personal integrity. And what's that going to cost you? It's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to disconnection, not just from your team and your family, but also from yourself. But ultimately, your leadership is going to collapse. It's going to hit that wall and it's going to be under scrutiny and it's not going to stand the test of time. I've said many times, and I'll say it again, I'm not smart enough to be different people, different places, right? So what you see is what you get wherever I'm at because I can't remember who I'm supposed to be to this person or to that audience or to this one. So if I don't do it here, I don't do it there. And if I'm consistent with that, then it makes it easier for me to stay true to who I am. Now, does that mean that I've been perfect and I'm not falling into this trap in the past? Absolutely not, because we've all done it. I've said yes way too many times when I should have said no, and then I worked my butt off to try to make it happen. Fortunately, I've always had a great team around me that was able to step in and fill the gaps because I know where I'm weak for the most part. But I'm not afraid to get people in who are stronger, who are faster, who are more talented, who are better at that which I'm horrible at. So really, if we're talking about this whole dopamine addiction, we really have to do a couple things, three things, and break this addiction. We have to rewire the loop, right? First of all, we have to name the pattern. I'm not talking about Bob, George, Fred, or Jeff. I'm talking about asking ourselves, when am I performing instead of leading? When am I not being authentic to who I am? The second one is we have to pause. We have to not get in such a hurry, right? We have to pause and actually look at it and ask ourselves, what's real versus what they see? And third, this is the hardest one. We have to choose integrity, even if it costs us admiration, even if it costs us friends. Because the truth is, if your friends expect you to sacrifice your integrity, are they really friends? If your leader expects you to lie, cheat, steal, abuse people on their behalf, are they really looking out for your best interest? Because the thing we have to remind ourselves of is that applause is fleeting, but character is foundational. I don't need to be celebrated, but I do need to be consistent. So ask yourself, where do you feel pressure to perform instead of lead? And it's okay to jot them down in your journal, talk to yourself, talk to your friend, talk to somebody you can trust and talk it out, or even have the conversation in your own head. But I found the conversations that I have in my own head aren't near as effective as when I begin to externalize them, when I begin to verbalize them, even if it's just me in the room talking to myself. Because there is power, true power, in authenticity, right? Authenticity is not a weakness. It's a doorway that builds trust. And trust is that foundation that your entire leadership legacy is going to be built on. That trust is going to determine how much people want to lean in and give you their discretionary effort, how much people want to place their futures into your vision, right? How they want to commit into that. Because we don't need perfection, but we do need presence. And not just somebody running around, blowing around, braggadocious, but true presence that's there where the rubber meets the road, where the work is happening, where the battles are taking place, right? There's a lot of stories, medieval set stories that, that show the battles that happen. And then once the battle's done, then you have a king or a prince or a royal that comes riding in with all polished armor, so that they can pose in the middle of all this battle as though I did this. We have a lot of leaders that are just like that. They rely on somebody else to do the hard work, the muddy work, and then want to swoop in at the last minute and act as though they've been there leading and guiding the entire way. Don't confuse that with the leader that wants to micromanage every bit of it, right? Because that undermines trust as well. But there's a balance that's there. There's a rhythm that's natural in every circumstance, in every relationship, in every leadership position. And unless you slow down and understand who you are, where you're going, you'll never find that rhythm. One of the false narratives that we carry is that I must have all the answers. I have to be the one. No one else can come up with a solution because I have to be the one that does it, right? I have to be the one that everybody looks to and knows that I am the man. I am, we used to call it the Superman syndrome, right? I am the one everybody's going to turn to in that moment, and I live for that. There's a leader at one of our plants down in Fort Worth, the company I was with, and he and we had a lot of conversations. Great young leader. He's got a lot of growing to do, but he has come so far in the years that I've known him. But one thing about him is, and he'll tell you up front, he thrives in that end of the month crush when everything has been slow all month and they have to get the entire month out in the last 4 days. He loves that adrenaline aspect. He loves that piece. He loves being that guy. And we've had many conversations that you are that guy if you're consistent throughout the month, and that leaves you that margin at the end for those last minute discretionary above and beyond type things, that growth opportunity. And it's a hard lesson to learn because we've all had to learn it. Any of us who have been successful in life, we've all had that moment where or that season where we were the one they sent to when there was trouble. We were the ones that they gave the broken stuff to so that we could fix it. But that's not all of our identity, right? We're going to do that from time to time, but that can't be who we are 100% of the time. So ask yourself today, what are you hiding that's costing you leadership energy? What are you having to work to mask that is keeping you from leading in the areas where you really need to be leading? Ask yourself, which is harder? Is it harder to be liked, or is it harder being real? Now, a lot of times, we come through some of these conversations and we think, oh crap, well, yeah, but I get it, but what do I do with that? There's a way to rebuild trust and integrity. There's a way to close the gap between your reputation and reality, right? Character decides whether you're going to stay in the room or whether you're going to run. Character decides how consistent you're going to be under pressure, how consistent you're going to be in building unshakable influence. So here's how you rebuild that. Here's how you rebuild that trust. Here's how you rebuild and start allowing that integrity to flourish. One, identify the image, right? What image do I have? And does that image match who I am, or does it match what people expect of me? Two, audit it, right? What does reality actually look like? Some of the most humbling things in the world are 360 reviews, right? And if your team trusts you, they'll be real with you, and they will let you know, right, the areas that you are weak, the things that you need to do more of, the things you need to do less of, the things you need to eliminate immediately. Because your teams, they're looking for a leader. They're looking for somebody that can help them be successful, somebody who brings security to what they're doing in their lives as well. Then once you've audited it, then you own the gap. What is the difference? What's the difference between reality and image? That's yours to fix. Because if you look to blame anybody else or throw it anywhere other than upon yourself, then you've already lost, right? You've lost yourself, you've lost your way, and you've lost that whole foundation of integrity, which says it starts with me and it ends with me. No one can make you do what you don't want to do. No one can make you be who you don't want to be. Now, there can be pressure, and you can give in to that pressure, but you still get to make the choice. No one can make you a victim unless you want to be a victim. No one can make you a victor unless you want to be the victor. So, once you've decided to own that gap, then begin to act with integrity to fix it. Sometimes that's going to people and apologizing. Sometimes it's adjusting what you do, how you do it. Sometimes it's a subtle shift that you know is happening and people see and people experience, but it's not like that big explosive transformation. But sometimes it is. And then repeat. You repeat that in your community. You be consistent. You're going to fail. You're going to fall. You're going to come short time and time and time and time again, and that's okay. You stop, you reset, you adjust, you realign. So ask yourself, where do I need to apologize or realign? And if you say nowhere, then I would go back up to step one. So, are you admired or trusted? Are you admired or trusted? One can be faked, but the other has to be earned. Right? You don't realize how addicted you are to like the applause and all of that until you start like a podcast, until you start writing books, till you start putting out articles, and then your only feedback is when you start seeing people respond, you start seeing people listen, you start seeing people download, right? And it's easy to get lost in that. Oh my God, I only had X number of people like that this week. Where did I go short, right? Or why is nobody buying this book, or why is none of this happening? And if you're not careful, you can get caught in that, chasing after that, so that they like it, and you justify it saying, well, it's because then if they like it, then they'll begin to trust me more in those areas. But the reality is, and it's a hard lesson, you just be consistent and continue going and doing what you know that you are supposed to be doing and what you're called to do. And through patience, it begins to gain traction. Your leadership in your life is the exact same way, because we have to move to a point where we're leading from the inside out, not the outside in, right? I think it was Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, a young writer, came and asked him to read some of his work. And eventually, Samuel Clemens agreed. And after a while, he ran into this writer again, and the writer said, "Hey, did you read it?" He said, "I read it." He said, "Well, did you like it?" He said, "It was good." He said, "Well, am I a writer?" And Samuel Clemens said, "If I have to tell you you're a writer, you're not a writer. If someone has to tell you you're a leader, you're not a leader. But I can tell you that you are. In some area of your life, in some way, in some form or fashion, there's somebody who is following you. And it's your responsibility to be authentic and true and lead from who you are." I mean, the news is filled with leaders who had great reputations, and then one day they fell. Just this last week in the news, you had the whole article or the story at the Coldplay concert, where it flashes up and they show the couple that's there, and they go to hide. They scramble and hide. And the commentator, I thought it was so funny, because the commentator said, "Hey, they're either very shy or they're having an affair." Well, it turns out they were having an affair. And it's the CEO of a company who ended up now losing his job and losing his company, but probably losing his marriage. I hope they can work it out, but you never know. He didn't wake up one day and say, "Hey, let's go do this." There's something that started driving him toward needing that affirmation of something other than what he had and who he was. And then that led down the path to where he was found out, and suddenly it's over for him. Because before that, he had the image of being an upright individual, a man of impeccable integrity and character. But now that's all anybody sees and knows is that video. Well, it doesn't help that it's all over social media, and we'll be over social media for a while. It's over every news cycle, right? So it's going to get us play for sure. But he fell because reality didn't match his reputation. When you think about all of the news articles and stuff where somebody does something horrible and they're going and interviewing the family and the friends, and they're like, well, he was such a quiet person, or she was such a quiet person who was, always willing to help, always willing to do this, always willing to do that, and had this image of, but in the background was doing all this other things. Don't be that person. Be who your image is, right? Because if you work to manage your image and that's all of your effort is going into that, then you're going to have integrity fatigue because you're not going to remember who you're supposed to be. You're going to continue to push and strive and fight to be something that you're really not because you think people need you to be that way. One thing I remind myself all the time is that I'm not leading alone, right? Even if I feel alone, I'm not leading alone. That God sees me, God strengthens me. I really look to Psalms 26:2 a lot. And in it, the psalmist says, test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind. And if I do that and I challenge myself and I make the adjustments where I'm not being true and authentic, then there's less chance that when I enter into the battle, that the foundation is going to slip away, that the steed is going to fail, or the sword is going to be weak. But one thing that's important when we listen to conversations like today is that we don't just reflect on it, right? Reflection is important, but we don't just reflect, but we respond. We adjust, we adapt, right? We correct and become more of who we're actually called and created to be. So with that in mind, if you just pause and you think through who people think you are versus who you are, and you identify one gap, just one gap, right? Because you can't fix it all at one time, but fix that one thing. You identify the first one, then begin to ask yourself, what step can I take? What step can I take to align who I am with who people see me to be? But the next step is the most important, is who am I going to invite that's going to help hold me accountable? Who's going to be invited into this conversation that's going to help hold me accountable? Right? We've talked about it in past episodes, right? My desire or drive to eliminate sarcasm or reduce sarcasm, and having to invite my team to help hold me accountable, invite my family to help hold me accountable. Because when I invite them, not only am I asking for their trust, I commit myself to that process. Because the best leaders, the most effective leaders, the ones who stand the test of time, they aren't the ones who shine the brightest most of the time, right? They weren't the flash in the pan. They're the ones who stood. They're the ones who understood that reputation is going to get them into the room, but reality is going to determine if they stay, right? A resume can get you through the door, but who you are determines if you stay. So if someone pulled back the curtain on your life today, would there be anything that you would try to hide? And that's an important question because the world doesn't need polished leaders. It needs whole leaders. It needs people who understand and know that life is tough and life gets messy and life becomes so confusing at times that it's easy to sacrifice who you are. It's easy to give in to whatever that emotional stimuli is at the moment. But if we're committed to who we are and we are committed to walk in truth no matter the cost, then we're not walking alone. We're walking with a million other leaders who are committing to the same thing. Because I go back to this. Reputation may get you into the room, but reality is what people experience once you're there. So lead in such a way that when that curtain's pulled back, there's nothing to hide. You don't have to scramble to clean the house before the guests show up. There's no surprises. There's no spin. There's just true consistency. There's character and there's truth. Because in the long run, authenticity will always outlast applause. And I'll say this again. The world doesn't need more polished leaders. It needs whole leaders. So Thank you again for tuning in to Lead Well, Live Whole. If this message challenged or encouraged you, share it with another leader who's committed to walking in truth. And remember, new episodes drop every Wednesday at 6:30 a.m. And I do have Lead Well, Live Whole book, Eagle Leadership, and Whose Circus Is This, all available on Amazon and through Audible. So until next time, I'm your host, Michael Sirmon, reminding you, don't just build a name, build a life. Lead with truth, live with courage, lead well, live whole.
Thanks for joining us on Lead Well, Live Whole. If this added value to your journey, share it with a friend and subscribe. Until next time, lead those you serve well and live your life whole.